What if the presidency that felt the most chaotic, the most unpredictable, was actually a performance? Well, today we're digging into a really fascinating analysis that argues exactly that there's a secret, high-tech grand strategy hiding right there in plain sight. So let's get into it. The source material we're looking at today really just lays it all out with this one sentence. It sets the entire stage for everything we're about to explore. So that's the big question, right? Is it all just random noise, or is it a masterclass in political theater? All right, to really get our heads around this theory, we're going to break it down into its 5 key parts. The smart chaos doctrine itself, something called the peacemaker mask, the technocratic war room, a war by attrition strategy, and finally, the economic pivot. Okay, so first up, what in the world is smart chaos? Let's really unpack the core of this whole idea. This slide really gets to the heart of it. On the one hand, what most people see, what we see in the headlines, is impulsive, erratic, totally unpredictable. But on the other hand, this analysis suggests something completely different is going on behind the scenes. A calculated, data-driven, and yeah, even theatrical performance. And that brings us to this key idea, the disruptor persona. According to our source, all the unpolished language, the dramatic press conferences, those aren't gaffes, they're a tool. It's a deliberate strategy to shift the perception of the U.S. away from the old world bully archetype to something more like a shocked peacemaker, and that shift gives the administration a ton of room to maneuver. So, you might be asking, how does this disruptor persona actually play out in the real world? Well, let's take a look at our first case study, the war in Ukraine. The source calls this strategic theater. Publicly, out in the open, the image is one of a peacemaker, hosting leaders, calling for calm, talking about de-escalation. But behind the curtain, the entire engine of military support is being completely rewired. And here's the 3-step playbook. First, you've got the public performance, all about ending an unjust war. Then, step 2 is the quiet part, rolling out a European purchase model, which basically encourages allies to buy U.S. weapons for Ukraine. And the result? Step 3, a perception victory. The U.S. defense industry keeps humming along, but there's no political heat for handouts, and the president walks away looking like a master negotiator. Now, let's peek behind that curtain at the internal machinery, because the theory goes that the military itself is being rebuilt from the ground up, but with a Silicon Valley mindset. Our source calls this the Silicon Valley Commission, and the idea here is pretty radical. It's a strategic end run around the traditional, slow-moving military bureaucracy to inject a fast, agile, startup mentality right into the heart of the Pentagon. And listen, we are not talking about some low-level advisors here. Get this. The people reportedly being brought in as lieutenant colonels in the Army Reserve are the heavy hitters. We're talking about top execs from places like Palantir, Meta, and OpenAI. The goal seems to be to fundamentally rewrite the military's DNA. So this new way of thinking is being called algorithmic warfare. It's about treating conflict less like a traditional war and more like a tech startup. So forget massive ground invasions. The new focus is on hard data, on metrics like an enemy's burn rate for ammunition. That money is then redirected into things like AI, hypersonics, and quantum computing. What you get is a leaner, faster, and way more unpredictable fighting force. Okay, so we've got this new high-tech military. How does it actually operate on the world stage? Well, let's turn to 2 of the most complicated geopolitical hotspots out there, Iran and Pakistan. For Iran, the strategy is called the reluctant warrior narrative. Here's how the playbook works. First, Iran makes some kind of aggressive move. Then comes the strategic shock. The president publicly expresses surprise, maybe even outrage, which frames America as the victim. The source argues this is a deliberate move to get around any anti-war feelings at home and open the door for a systematic war of attrition, basically a long campaign of precision strikes designed to bleed Iran's military dry. At the same time, the strategy reportedly involves what's being called a subcontract with Pakistan. It's a very transactional model designed to turn Pakistan's military into a regional proxy, creating what's called operational depth against Iran. And here's a look at how that model is supposed to work. It's a very clear quid pro quo. The U.S. offers specific incentives. We're talking key economic aid, advanced military gear, and political support for a strongman leader. In return, Pakistan delivers by putting pressure on Iran's eastern border and basically becoming a more predictable partner in a very, very unpredictable region. But here's the crucial part. none of this military maneuvering is happening in a vacuum. It's all apparently tied to a much bigger economic vision, one that aims to reshape global trade itself. So, according to this source, the aggressive use of sanctions, which looked, chaotic from the outside, actually acted as a catalyst. It forced a huge realignment in global trade, and all that disruption created a strategic opening for countries like India to push through massive trade deals that probably would have been impossible otherwise. And here is the final piece of this whole economic puzzle. That unpredictable style we talked about, it becomes a tool. The president basically acts as a chief investment officer for America, using that very unpredictable to persuade key allies like Korea, Japan, and India to pour massive amounts of capital back into U.S. manufacturing. So let's just quickly recap the core ideas of this smart chaos doctrine. You've got a disruptor persona that masks a very calculated plan. You have public theater being used to pull off covert military goals. The military is getting a complete makeover based on tech industry logic. Transactional, business-like alliances are replacing old-school diplomacy, and it's all about using geopolitical chaos to get an economic advantage. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question, doesn't it? Is this smart chaos just a one-time political anomaly, or are we looking at the new playbook for how to wield power in the 21st century? That's something to think about.